Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The union budget is just around the corner. In the previous budget, the Ministry of Defence received the highest allocation among ministries at 5.25 lakh crore rupees. In 2021 Budget 2, the ministry topped the list. This year, industry experts want the government to reintroduce schemes to incentivize research and development expenditure. They also recommend increasing the allocation for schemes like Innovation for Defence Excellence and Technology Development Fund to 2,000 crore rupees to boost MSMEs and the startup ecosystem. The industry is seeking a concrete plan for the implementation of the policy of insurance bonds. To discuss this and more, we're joined by SP Shukla, President of the Society of Indian Defence Manufacturers, Chairman of Mahindra Aerospace and Defence. Also with us, Rajendra Singh Bhatia, the CEO of Defence and Aerospace at Bharat Forge Limited. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Mr. Shukla, what would be your number one ask? There have been a number of measures that have been taken by the government to promote indigenous manufacturing in the defence sector. What would be your number one hope from Budget 2023?
I understand, and we all know, there are competing demands on the finance minister from different sectors of the society: health, education, infrastructure. We understand that. Keeping in mind all relevant factors and the situation on our borders, my hope is the defense budget will show a real increase, which means after factoring in inflation, there will be real increase in the outlay for defense procurement. Now, defense procurement, which often is called capital expenditure budget, is part of overall budget. This is the portion of the budget which industry will specifically look at, that it has a real increase after taking into account inflation factor already.
So that's important. You're saying hope there will be an increase in capital outlay for defense procurement in the capital budget. Mr. Bhatia, if I can get you in at this stage to take that forward from what Mr. Shukla said, what would be your view on what should be the capital budget allocation this time around? How much of it should go towards procurement?
Parikshit, I totally endorse what Mr. Shukla had said. There would be competing demands for the resources which are available in the nation. But we are expecting, in real terms, increase over the last year. But more importantly, I would like to see things which may not be really requiring funds, but require certain incentives to be brought in. And we can talk about this a little more. But the key point is that in the last budget, Government of India had announced that 25% of R&D budget would be given to private industry. So I am talking about these kind of things also to be brought in, not only the capital increase. Capital increase will certainly help, but taking some of these actions will probably take us a little further on our path for a Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Right.
Over to you, back to you,
Mr. Shukla, when we speak about incentives for R&D expenditure when it comes to the domestic defense industry, how important is this, considering that defense needs change over time? We're looking at government as the only buyer. You have long timelines for deliveries. The nature of warfare is changing. How important are these for R&D of the domestic defense industry?
You have actually hit the nail on its head perfectly. As Mr. Bhatia also said earlier, all over the world, since there is only one customer, and whatever you spend, if that customer doesn't buy, you have nowhere else to go, unlike other industries. Defense expenditure largely is kind of earmarked in the defense budgets of the governments. So when you develop a new fighter plane, when you develop a new tank, when you develop a new missile, or you develop even a simple armored vehicle, defense procurement budgets do make adequate provision for R&D. And that is something which can be taken care of by Make One projects. We need more and more Make One projects where government and industry together share the cost, government sharing larger percentage of the cost, and that makes it possible for industry to undertake. Now, even in Make One, industry puts a skin in the game. Not everyone participating in a Make One program will win or get sufficient orders. But if out of 5 players, even if 1 or 2 get the orders, others have the satisfaction of having developed the technology, of which larger part was given by the government and smaller part was incurred by them. So I think going forward, sharing of capital expenditure on development, R&D, that should be the motto. So far, this has been done through DRDO. They have developed some excellent technologies in several fields, and they have many success stories to talk. But one organization cannot do everything when you need to develop 500 different products for defense or 1,000 different products for defense. It is just not possible from the point of view of bandwidth of management. And then things start taking prioritization. This is more important than the other. And then things start to take time. Some things will get faster, some things get slower. So they have done excellent job for developing many technologies, but we need to increase the funnel. And that is where private sector getting involved more and more in technology development, that comes down to finally R&D budgets. That will be a great help.
Right. Mr. Shukla, if I were to ask you about incentives, you said we need more Make-One projects. More capital investment in R&D is needed by the government as well. What kind of outlay when it comes to R&D expenditure would you be seeking?
Large projects need large funding. So we are talking in thousands of crores, not in hundreds of crores. So there are 2 types of projects when we talk R&D, and this is a subject favorite of mine. I'm fundamentally an engineer. There is applied research, there is basic research, and then there is development of technology, which is more practical work. Now, basic research perhaps belongs in the laboratories. Indian private sector will take it, but perhaps it is few years away. It is the applied research and application development. That is where we are focusing. So there are many technologies which are developed at a smaller niche level. So very rightly, and I appreciate the government, they have thrown up a challenge of 75 new technologies to be introduced in the armed forces. So 75 new technologies are being developed by a challenge process in the ministry, very well thought out program. Those are niche products which overall go into larger products. So we are talking about 2 different types of R&D support. One is in the platform development, like FICV, like light tank. These are the projects where you support at a platform level. And then there is R&D where you talk about a specific problem to be solved. That is a problem-solving approach. For example, how do you reduce vibration in a particular platform? How do you have better focused infrared or sight system? Now, they are the subsystems which will finally go into the platforms. So many MSMEs as well as some large companies also do niche research. But the platform support is something I would say should take our parallel priority, because the platform support will in return pass on some of this work to MSMEs, and entire ecosystem will develop.
Right. Thank you for putting that in perspective. Let me get in Mr. Bhatia once again. Mr. Bhatia, one of the key demands, and you can also reply to what Mr. Shukla is saying, one of your key demands was to increase allocation for schemes like Innovation and Defence Excellence, Technology Development Fund to 2,000 crores. Why is this important, according to you?
Okay, so I think I'm going to give my answer in about 2 parts. First part would be towards the need for R&D funding, and secondly is on the incentives which are required. Now, R&D funding, we have been hearing about it, but if you really want to become what we call a self-reliant nation, and if you are really wanting to be Atmanirbhar, you have to develop indigenous technologies. Now, how do you develop indigenous technologies? It is not that, like we said, technologies could be developed, that some core technologies are developed at DRDO level, but many technologies actually, and breakthrough technologies come out of what we call garages, small setups, small, I would say, setups which are being driven by the technocrats or the people who are passionate about developing technology. Now we started with IDEX schemes, but IDEX schemes in these are actually, I would say, just part of the overall game plan. Just to tell you, a little expenditure of close to about $7 to $8 million in IDEX actually kick-started so-called million minds, and 860 new startups started in the area of defense just in the last year. So when we are talking about now that you have started this scheme, you need to fund it. People need to see light at the end of the tunnel. You're not just going to be developing merely on that 1.5 crore allocation. You are looking at revenue stream to come in. And that will only happen when orders are placed. Hence, the demand for 2,000 crores is really imperative and should be given. Coming back to the second point, I think your
final
focus was towards...
Please, sir.
Yeah, your focus was towards the recommendations for the budget. And I think that's there to really give an impetus to R&D. There were two demands which I must put across. Both are related to R&D. First one was that we used to get a income tax benefit on R&D spends done in the companies, which has now been withdrawn since the year, I think year before last, this was withdrawn. We could easily put that. This will not even ask for additional budget. All it is asking for an incentive for expenditure on R&D in defense, which should be maybe considered at 200% of the spend so that you can save on taxes. So this will indirectly benefit a large number. And second was on exports.
Right.
India has been seeing a lot of traction there, and we could give some benefits there in terms of duty drawback. I think you are wanting to ask some other question.
All right.
So, hello.
Yes, I'm going to ask for final recommendations. You made an important point about exports as well, Mr. Bhatia. Mr. Shukla, on ease of doing business, on increasing exports from India, for finding greater markets abroad, what would be your recommendation? Do you also hope for some ease of doing business in the defense sector?
I think as far as exports go, a lot of things have been liberalized and there are no major constraints on exports per se. There is one factor which always comes up. Whenever you want to export something, for example, an armored vehicle we have and we had exported to UN and others. First question they ask, has your army bought it? Has your navy bought it? That remains a primary criteria in any export inquiry. Are you an existing supplier of that product? So this is one thing which is important. All over the world, people who have become exporters in defense, you will find that their own country, their own armed forces buy from their own indigenous companies, and those indigenous companies are then able to compete in international markets. Having achieved economies of scale from the domestic market, they are able to compete very well because cost has been taken care of. The fixed cost has been taken care of in the domestic market. This is the secret of exports.
Right.
If you look at the cars, you will see the same thing, US, Japan, India. If you have a large domestic market, you can export in that category for other nations also. So economies of scale matter in exports. Ultimately, 6 countries account for 80% of the defense business. So if we keep in mind that there are 6 countries accounting for 80% of the defense market, rest of the world is only 20%. So economies of scale have to come from the procurement of these 6 nations, and then they make it available to rest.
Right. All right. We've run out of time, but Mr. Shukla, Mr. Rajendra Bhatia, thank you very much for joining us with your recommendations for the defense industry in Budget 2023. We're going to take a short break here in Newscentre, but when we return, we'll get you more stories on the budget and also the latest in the major flashpoint between the government and the judiciary